Tonight we'll drift through 6 simple dishes, each one a quiet comfort from a kitchen past. Some came from seaside cafes, others from humble staff rooms or early morning bakeries, but all of them in their own way are soft steps toward rest. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let the warmth of familiar flavors guide you gently towards sleep. The first recipe tonight is warm banana bread with walnuts. There was a cafe tucked along a sloping street in London's youthful Junction neighborhood, back in the day when the storefronts still bore hand-painted signs and the shop cats had names. They didn't advertise their banana bread. Not really. No signs, no specials board. But every evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the last of the afternoon crowd filed out, that's when the magic happened. The baker, a man who looked like he'd been born into an apron, always started just after 6. It's for the morning staff, he'd say with a nod. But the smell, that's for the street. And he was right. That scent, it poured out into the cool evening like a promise. It stopped dog walkers mid-step. It made couples linger by the window. It even pulled in the odd late-shift bus driver who claimed the smell alone made his route bearable. He taught me how to make it once, on a slow Thursday when the mixer was silent and the dishes were done. Start with the bananas, he said. Not perfect ones, tired ones, spotted and soft like they've had a long week. You mash them in a bowl, gently, with the back of a fork, never a blender. They should still have some fight left in them. He cracked in 2 eggs, their yolks golden and calm, and added melted butter, not hot, just warm enough to melt into the fruit, like a whispered apology. Then came the sugar, brown, soft, and forgiving. It's not just for sweetness, he told me. It's for soul. We sifted in the flour, a touch of baking soda, and a pinch of salt. He always stirred slowly at this point, folding rather than beating. Banana bread doesn't like a rush, he warned. It crumbles when it's hurried. Then came the walnuts. He'd toast them first, just a handful, scattered on a pan over a low flame until their scent bloomed. Into the batter they went, cracked and uneven, like old stories tucked into the folds of memory. He poured the mixture into a loaf tin lined with parchment, the kind that curled at the corners like old pages. Then into the oven it went, 325 degrees Fahrenheit, no fan, no fuss, just heat, time, and patience. And that's when the smell started. It didn't shout, it sighed. A slow, spreading warmth that smelled like childhood breakfasts and late-night talks and everything gentle between. People outside would glance at the door. Even the breeze seemed to slow down near that cafe. When it came out, he'd rest it on a wire rack, still in its tin, and tap the top with his fingers like checking the pulse of something living. He never sliced it right away. Bread's like a good thought, he said. It needs a moment to settle. When he did cut it, carefully, slowly, you could see the steam rising, like a curtain lifting at a theater. Dense, moist, with pockets of walnuts and the faintest edge of crust. He'd wrap it in cloth and leave it behind the counter for the early crew. But every night, just before locking up, he'd break off one warm end piece for himself. Best eaten in quiet, he told me once. With tea maybe, or just your own company. Years later, I still make his banana bread on cool nights, when the world feels too loud or too fast. I mash the bananas with care, toast the walnuts, just so, and let the house fill with that same hush of sweetness. And when it's done, I don't eat it right away. I let it rest, like he did. I listen to the silence it leaves behind, and I remember that tiny cafe in the Junction where banana bread wasn't just a recipe, it was a ritual. A closing note. a soft-edged reminder that tomorrow would come, warm and golden. Sleep well. That was recipe 1. Our second recipe tonight is sweet vanilla yogurt with crushed digestive biscuits and honey. My first roommate in culinary school didn't cook. Not really. She could barely fry an egg without a little chaos, and her idea of mise en place was putting her books in order before cramming at the last minute. But every night before exams, no matter how tired we were, no matter how loud the kitchens had been that day, she'd pull out a little bowl, a spoon, and a quiet sense of purpose. Time to sign the peace treaty with the day, she'd say. That was her phrase, a peace treaty. Not a reward, not a dessert, just something small, sweet, and still enough to smooth the creases out of your thoughts. And what she made was simple, just vanilla yogurt, crushed digestive biscuits, and honey. But like most things that last, it wasn't about complication, it was about comfort. She always started with the yogurt, plain, full fat, with just enough vanilla stirred in to remind you that life didn't have to be loud to be lovely. She used to keep a little bottle of vanilla extract tucked in her desk drawer, said it helped her sleep, just smelling it. She'd scoop the yogurt into her favorite ceramic bowl, the one with a chip on the side from when she dropped it moving in. It holds better now, she said once, tracing the crack with her thumb, like me. Then came the biscuit, digestives, the kind from the corner store, across from campus. She'd lay 2 on a folded paper towel and gently crush them with the bottom of a glass, never too fine. I want crumbles, not dust, she'd joke, though she meant it. The texture mattered, a soft bite, met with a gentle crunch. A bit like life really, smooth in some parts, rough in others. She sprinkled the crumbs over the yogurt, with care, spreading them like she was tucking in a blanket. Then came the honey, not too much, just enough. She never measured it, just drizzled it slowly in a thin spiral from the outside in, like drawing a sleepy galaxy on top. Sometimes she'd sit at the tiny kitchen table to eat it. Other times she'd take it back to her bunk and eat cross-legged with her textbooks still open. But always slowly, always with little pauses between bites, like the ritual itself mattered more than the flavor. I remember watching her do this on a particularly cold evening, the kind of night where the wind rattled the windows and the streetlights looked like stars trapped in jars. We had our pastry practical the next morning, and nerves were high. She caught me staring and passed me a second bowl without a word. It surprised me how calming it was. The tang of the yogurt, the slight caramel of the biscuits, and that touch of honey on the tongue. It didn't shout. It didn't fill you up, but it quieted something inside, a settling of the breath. A little kindness after a day of burning sugar and clattering pans. Years later, I still make that peace treaty when my mind's too noisy to settle. I keep a jar of vanilla yogurt in the fridge and a sleeve of digestives in the cupboard, just in case. It doesn't need fuss or garnish, just the 3 ingredients and the memory of a friend who couldn't poach an egg but knew exactly how to rest. So tonight, as the hours grow still and sleep begins to edge into the room, let your thoughts crumble like those biscuits. Let the sweetness drizzle in quietly. Let the day go and make your own little treaty with the night. Sleep deeply. That was recipe 2. Our third recipe tonight is baked cinnamon apple slices with a touch of butter. My aunt had a way of showing care without ever needing to say the words out loud. She wasn't the type for big talks or long hugs, but if she came in the door looking tired, quiet, or a little too heavy in the eyes, she'd nod once, say nothing, and turn toward the kitchen. You'd sit down, and soon enough, the smell of baked apples would begin to float through the air, like an unspoken lullaby made of cinnamon and soft light. She used to say, warm fruit is medicine that doesn't ask questions. It didn't matter what the ache was, heartache, stomachache, the kind of ache you couldn't name. Those apple slices seemed to help. They didn't cure anything, not really, but they comforted, and that was enough. The apples she chose were never the fancy kind, just firm ones from the bowl on the counter, whatever had gone a little soft at the edges or dulled in color. She'd peel them slowly, the knife moving in graceful spirals, always trying to keep the skin in one long curl. A whole peel means someone's thinking of you, she told me once. She never said who. I think it was her way of making each slice a quiet wish for someone's peace. Once peeled, she'd cut them into crescent thin wedges, not too thick, not too thick, just enough to soften without losing their shape in the oven. She laid them flat in a single layer on an old baking dish, the enamel chipped in one corner where it had once been dropped, probably by me. It was always that same dish. Then came the butter. Not too much, just little flecks, scattered here and there, like tucking in a soft blanket, and over that, a sprinkle of cinnamon. No sugar. She didn't believe in it. The apple knows how to be sweet, she'd say, as if nature had already done its part. She'd place the dish in the oven, low and slow, never rushed, and the warmth would start to fill the house. Not just the scent, but the feeling of something good on the way. You'd wait in silence, listening to the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the faint pop of the apples releasing their juice, the cinnamon melting into something deeper. By the time she pulled them out, the slices would be golden at the edges, tender but holding together, glistening with their own syrup and the soft gloss of melted butter. She never plated them with flair, just spooned them gently into a bowl and set it in front of you, like a quiet offering. Nothing dramatic, just presence, just warmth. I remember once, I asked her why she didn't add raisins or nuts or a little maple syrup, like in cookbooks. She smiled and said, because when someone's hurting, you don't give them noise, you give them quiet. And that was her cooking philosophy, really. Make it honest, make it gentle, let it speak in whispers. I still make those apple slices sometimes, especially on nights when the world feels like it's spinning a little too fast. When I want something slow, something familiar, I peel them slowly, even now, trying to keep the skin in one long curl. I lay them in a dish that's not quite the same, but close enough. I scatter butter, like she did. I skip the sugar, and when they come out of the oven soft, warm, fragrant, I sit with them quietly, just like she used to. It's not about the recipe, it's about what it makes room for. Reflection, rest, a small kind of healing. So tonight, if your heart feels a little heavy, or your thoughts a little loud, bake some apples. Let the warmth rise, let the cinnamon settle, and let the quiet comfort you, the way only food made with love and no questions can. Sleep well. That was recipe 3. Our 4th recipe tonight is simple mashed potatoes with garlic and olive oil. There was an Italian sous chef I worked with during one of those early unglamorous kitchen jobs, the kind where the shifts stretch too long, your feet feel like bricks, and everyone speaks in shrugs by the end of the night. His name was Nico, and he hardly ever raised his voice. But when the last order was out and the line wiped down, he'd disappear into the back kitchen for just a few minutes. He always returned with a pot. Quietly, no announcement. What he carried inside, always the same thing. Mashed potatoes. Not flashy, not restaurant fare. Just humble, pillowy mash, steam curling up like a sigh. He'd ladle some into mismatched bowls for anyone still around. Comfort lives in softness. He'd murmur in his heavy Italian accent, like a lullaby passed down through generations. Then he'd eat in slow spoonfuls, as if the day needed gentling before it could be let go. He made them simply. A pot of peeled potatoes, cut into even chunks, dropped into salted water, just deep enough to cover. He never rushed the boil. He believed in slow tenderness. While the potatoes softened, he'd peel 2 or 3 cloves of garlic and toss them into a small saucepan with olive oil. Not sizzling, just warm enough to coax out their perfume without bitterness. He swirled the pan slowly, almost hypnotically, until the garlic turned golden and the oil took on its quiet strength. The potatoes, once fork tender, were drained carefully and returned to the pot, steam rising like memory. He'd pour in the garlic oil, bits of golden garlic included, and mash it all with a worn wooden spoon that had clearly seen better days. No cream, no butter, just olive oil and salt, maybe a dash of cracked pepper if he was feeling generous. There was a reverence in the way he stirred, slow, like he was rocking a baby, like he was smoothing out the wrinkles in a hard day. It wasn't just food, it was ritual, the kind that doesn't need explaining, only sharing. Some nights we'd eat standing up, too tired to sit. Others, we'd settle on overturned crates in the prep area, eating in silence. And in those moments, the mashed potatoes became more than food. They were a kind of exhale. The warmth was in your hands, the softness in your mouth, and the quiet Nico left in his wake. Well, it did more than fill your belly. It gave your spirit somewhere to rest. I've made them that way ever since. Not always after long shifts, but certainly on long days. When the world feels sharp, or loud, or too fast, I peel potatoes and let them bubble quietly on the stove. I warm garlic in olive oil until the scent turns buttery. I mash slowly, gently, until the whole thing becomes soft enough to hold the day's weight without collapsing. There's something healing about it. Maybe it's the warmth, maybe it's the rhythm, maybe it's just that food doesn't need to be complicated to be kind. So tonight, if you need something to hold you, something to remind you that comfort is still possible, start with potatoes. Keep it simple. Let the garlic speak softly. Stir slowly. And remember that even in the quietest bowls, there's a kind of love that lingers. Sleep deeply. That was recipe 4. Our 5th recipe tonight is steamed milk with cardamom and a dash of nutmeg. There's an old Indian story that calls cardamom the spice of clarity. Not bold like cinnamon or biting like clove. Cardamom is gentle, fragrant. It doesn't shout, it lingers. I heard this from a mentor of mine in Mumbai years ago. She used to say, cardamom settles the spirit before sleep. It doesn't ask you to be calm, it invites you. She was the kind of chef who moved with intention, never in a rush, but never idle either. Every action, folding dough, slicing fruit, steeping spices, felt like part of a longer story. At the end of the night, when the kitchen lights had dimmed and the streets buzzed quietly outside, she'd take out a small brass pot. Into it she'd pour milk, not too cold, not too much, just enough for a mug. She'd crack open 2 green cardamom pods with the flat of her knife, just enough to let the seeds breathe. Into the milk they'd go, along with a whisper of nutmeg, freshly grated. The scent, even before the heat, was something else, like a secret being gently revealed. Then came the warming, not a boil, never a boil, just slow heat, the kind that asks you to stay close and pay attention. She'd swirl the pot now and then, letting the cardamom steep its way into the milk like a soft echo. Sometimes, when the day had been long, she'd add a drop of honey at the end, just enough to kiss the edge of sweetness, never to overpower. And when she poured it into a clay cup, it looked like moonlight, pale, warm, still. We'd sit on low stools just outside the kitchen door, backs against the wall, the city humming in the distance. The first sip always made me pause. There was something about that warmth, the way it touched the roof of your mouth, then slid down, wrapping your chest from the inside. Clarity, she'd say, sipping slowly. Not the kind that comes from thinking, the kind that comes when you stop trying so hard. And she was right. That milk didn't solve anything, but it softened everything. The rush of service, the ache in your legs, the noise in your mind, all of it faded, sip by gentle sip. These days when I make it at home, I still follow her way. A small pot, 2 cardamom pods, gently cracked, a pinch of nutmeg. Milk, warmed slowly, never rushed. I'll stand by the stove, with the light low and the world quiet, breathing in that soft perfume of spice and warmth. Sometimes I add honey, like she did. Sometimes I don't. It depends on the day. But I always sip it slowly, letting the warmth remind me that not everything needs to be solved before bed. Some things just need to be felt, softly, quietly. So tonight, if the world has felt too loud, or your thoughts won't let go, let this milk be your hush. Let the cardamom do its quiet work. Let the nutmeg remind you of stillness. And as the warmth spreads, may you find that same clarity, not through answers, but through calm. Sleep well, and sleep deep. That was recipe 5. Our 6th recipe tonight is easy buttered noodles with Parmesan and black pepper. There was a time in my life when everything felt a little improvised, paychecks falling short, classes running long, and dinners often more about survival than ceremony. But there was one dish that always managed to make it feel like we were doing something right. Easy buttered noodles with Parmesan and black pepper. Simple maybe, but simple isn't small. Simple can be sacred. I learned the dish from a server I dated during my first kitchen job. She didn't cook. She'd tell you that herself with a shrug and a grin. But she knew this one recipe. No frills, no exact measurements, just butter, noodles, a generous shake of black pepper, and a handful of grated Parmesan. That was it. She'd make it in a dented pot with a loose handle, always starting with a big pinch of salt in the water. The pasta should taste like the sea, she'd say. We'd boil the noodles, always the same brand of fettuccine she picked up from the corner store. No measuring timer, just a taste test, pulled straight from the pot with her fingers. When the noodles were done, she'd drain them with a bit of that starchy water held back in a mug. She didn't know why that trick worked, just that it did. Then came the butter, big, unapologetic chunks, tossed in while the pasta was still hot enough to melt it on contact. She'd stir with chopsticks, not tongs, not a spoon. It was what we had. Then the cheese, not the expensive kind, not fresh shaved or imported, just store-bought, fine grated Parmesan, melted into the butter, wrapping each strand like a silk robe. And finally, a lot of cracked black pepper. Not fancy flakes or coarse artisanal grind, just the kind that came from a cheap mill, clicked over the bowl with her thumb. We never ate at a table. Instead, we'd sit on the fire escape outside her apartment window, 2 floors up, city buzzing below, knees touching. The plates were always balanced on textbooks or each other's legs, and the steam from the noodles fogged up our glasses. And I swear, those noodles tasted like peace, like stillness, like a pause between everything else. No conversation felt too heavy over that meal. No worry stayed sharp. Something about that buttered pasta, the gentle spice of black pepper, the nutty melt of cheese, it softened things. It made the fire escape feel like a terrace, the cracked plates feel like china, and the night feel less like an ending, and more like a hush. Even now, when I make it, I don't change a thing. No upgrades, no additions, just fettuccine, butter, Parmesan, and pepper. A little starchy water if needed. And if it's a quiet night, I might even eat it near a window with the air on my face, just to remember what it was like to be held in that kind of small, good moment. Sometimes, the best comfort doesn't come from invention. It comes from repetition. From knowing that a dish you've made 100 times will still be exactly what you need. A bowl full of warmth, a memory in every bite, a recipe that never asked to be special, and somehow became unforgettable. Sleep soft, and may your dreams be simple and good. That was recipe 6. Our 7th recipe tonight is English pear and mint soup. served warm in a teacup. There's a kind of hush that only good food can summon. Not the quiet of an empty room, but the stillness that comes when something honest hits the tongue. I remember it from a spring evening in the dining room of a restaurant I once worked in. One with too many wine glasses and waiters who moved like whispers. We used to serve this soup, English pear and mint, warm and pale green, as an amuse-bouche. Just a few sips, in a teacup, no bigger than your hand. But when it landed on the table, the noise dropped away. No fireworks, just respect. I learned to make it from the head chef, who spoke softly but cooked with absolute certainty. He believed the fewer the ingredients, the more reverence you owed them. We'd start with fresh peas, bright and sweet, shelled by hand in the early afternoon. Their green so vibrant, it looked painted on. If they were late season, we'd blanch them quickly, just to coax out their softness. Early season peas though, straight into the pot. Into a saucepan, we'd melt a knob of butter, not sizzling, just easing into a quiet shimmer. A shallot, finely diced, went in first, cooked until it turned glassy and fragrant. Then the peas, and just enough vegetable stock to cover them. The heat stayed gentle. Too much aggression, and the soup would lose its calm. After a few minutes, the whole thing was blended, always while warm, always quickly. That's when the mint went in, torn fresh from the stems. Not chopped, not muddled, just torn, so the oils bloomed naturally into the steam. A splash of cream followed, just enough to lend silkiness, not enough to dull the green. We'd strain it through the finest sieve in the kitchen, pressing it gently to leave behind any pulp. What poured out was a smooth, almost luminous liquid, green as a spring morning, warm like the pocket of sunlight that hits your bed just before you fall asleep. We served it in vintage teacups, never bowls, the kind with fragile handles and floral rims. It was never announced with flair, just placed gently in front of the guest, with a murmured, "Please enjoy." And every time, without fail, the room grew quiet. People took one sip, closed their eyes, and let it linger. It was never about being bold. It was about being pure. I think about that soup more often than I thought I would. I make it now when I need to slow down, when the world's been too noisy, or my thoughts too jagged. There's something about shelling peas that settles the mind, about mint steeping in steam that makes you breathe deeper, and about holding a warm teacup with both hands. No spoon needed, just sips and silence. It reminds me that flavor doesn't always have to shout, that sometimes softness is strength, and that a small green soup, served without fanfare, can carry a whole memory in its warmth. So tonight, if your day has felt loud, or your spirit a little frayed, picture this: a teacup cradled between your palms, steam rising with a hint of mint, and a hush falling over the room. Not because of grandeur, but because something simple has been made with care. And that is enough. Good night. May your sleep be green, still, and softly spoken. That was recipe 7. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep. Having trouble sleeping. I was once young and ambitious and had many sleepless nights. When I need to fall asleep, I may read, I may have a snack, but I always pull back fond memories to soothe my mind. Never of my restaurant and achieving my Michelin stars, but always of my first week at Hotel St. George, or learning the way to truly cook at the Box Tree. And finally, when I became a man at Le Gavroche. Search for your own memories, forget the troubles awaiting you, and drift off keeping in mind these recipes for sleep.